The boardroom was thick with tension. Catherine Brady's polished shoes echoed against the marble floor as she froze, her confident smile fading when she saw 12-year-old Jamal Washington seated beside his father. The man she had dismissed as just another passenger was in fact the billionaire CEO now staring straight through her. Elijah Washington's voice sliced the silence. "Ms. Brady, you remember my son, don't you? Let's talk about the way you treated him." Around the table, executives exchanged uneasy glances. Catherine realized too late that the boy she'd humiliated in first class now held the power to end her career and change the company forever. Now let's rewind 3 days to see how this confrontation came to be. 3 days earlier, excitement radiated from 12-year-old Jamal Washington as he meticulously packed his carry-on luggage. Today marked a significant milestone, his first solo flight from Atlanta to New York to attend the prestigious Young Entrepreneurs Conference. Standing before his bedroom mirror, he adjusted his custom-tailored navy blue suit, a miniature version of the one his father often wore to board meetings. "Are you sure about the suit, son?" Elijah Washington leaned against the doorframe, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You might be more comfortable in something casual?" "Dad, I'm representing Washington Enterprises," Jamal replied, straightening his silk tie with nimble fingers. "First impressions matter. You taught me that." Elijah nodded, unable to argue with his own wisdom reflected back at him. At 42, he had built Washington Enterprises from a small tech startup into a billion-dollar corporation breaking barriers as one of the few black CEOs in the industry. He'd spent years teaching Jamal about business, never expecting his son to absorb everything so thoroughly and so young. Jamal's passion for entrepreneurship had emerged when he was just 6 years old. While other kids set up lemonade stands, Jamal created a neighborhood delivery service coordinating a team of friends on bicycles to transport groceries to elderly residents. By 9, he was developing simple mobile apps. Now, at 12, he'd created a promising platform that had caught the attention of the conference organizers. "I still think I should come with you," Elijah said, helping Jamal close his suitcase. "Dad, I'll be fine," Jamal insisted. "Aunt Vanessa will meet me at JFK. Besides, you have that meeting in London tomorrow." Elijah hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but you call me when you land, and again before you go to sleep. And if anything unusual happens," Jamal finished with a grin. "I know, Dad." The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was filled with Elijah's repeated instructions and reminders. Jamal patiently nodded along. Understanding his father's anxiety came from a place of love and experience. Elijah knew what the world could be like for a young black man, even one as privileged as Jamal. At the security checkpoint, Elijah knelt to Jamal's level, straightening his son's already perfect tie. "Remember what I always tell you. I have to work twice as hard to get half the respect," Jamal recited. "I know, Dad." Elijah's eyes softened. "I'm proud of you, son. So proud." He pulled Jamal into a tight embrace before reluctantly letting go. As Jamal walked through security, he felt the weight of his father's expectations alongside his own determination. He turned back once to wave his small figure, suddenly looking younger in the vast terminal, but his posture remained confident. Navigating to his gate, Jamal noticed the strange looks from other travelers. A 12-year-old in a business suit wasn't a common sight, but there was something else in those glances, something Jamal had become accustomed to recognizing. The slight narrowing of eyes, the double takes the whispers behind hands. He straightened his shoulders and continued walking. At the gate, a Skyline Airlines attendant announced boarding for first-class passengers. Jamal stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with a tight smile, scrutinized his ticket longer than necessary before reluctantly waving him through. As he stepped onto the jet bridge, Jamal caught the eye of flight attendant Catherine Brady, who gave him a dismissive glance before turning to warmly welcome the elderly white couple behind him. It was a small slight barely noticeable to most, but Jamal felt it like a tiny paper-cut minor but stinging. Little did he know this small interaction was just the beginning of what would become a life-changing journey. Jamal found his seat in the first-class cabin, 3A, a window seat with ample legroom. He stowed his backpack under the seat in front of him, careful not to wrinkle his suit as he settled in. Around him, business executives tapped on laptops and scrolled through smartphones. A few glanced up as he took his seat, their expressions ranging from surprise to visible discomfort. The man in 3B, a white-haired gentleman in his 60s, wearing a golf shirt embroidered with a country club logo, shifted away slightly when Jamal sat down. His name tag from a recently attended conference read Benjamin Reynolds, executive board member. "Excuse me, young man," Reynolds said, his voice carrying intentionally. "I believe first class is boarding now. This section requires a special ticket." Jamal smiled politely. "Yes, sir. I have a first-class ticket." He pulled out his boarding pass as proof, though he knew he wasn't obligated to do so. Reynolds frowned, squinting at the ticket before turning away with a hoof. "Standards are certainly slipping these days," he muttered loud enough for those nearby to hear. Jamal pretended to be absorbed in adjusting his seatbelt, trying to ignore the heat rising to his cheeks. His father had prepared him for moments like this, but theory and practice were very different things. Catherine Brady, the flight attendant who had dismissed him during boarding, approached their row. Her smile was bright as she addressed Reynolds. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage, Sir Scotch Neat?" Reynolds replied. Catherine nodded and then looked past Jamal, addressing the passenger in the aisle seat. When the businesswoman requested water, Catherine acknowledged her with a warm, "Certainly, ma'am." Jamal waited patiently, but Catherine turned to leave without taking his order. "Excuse me," Jamal said politely. "Could I have an apple juice, please?" Catherine paused, looking back with a tight smile. "I'll need to see your boarding pass again," she said, her voice tinged with suspicion. Jamal produced his ticket for the second time since boarding. Catherine examined it with exaggerated thoroughness. "This doesn't look right," she said. "Let me double-check this with the gate." "Is there a problem?" asked a soft voice. Another flight attendant had approached. Her name tag read Linda Chen. "Just verifying this young man's seating assignment," Catherine replied stiffly. Linda glanced at the boarding pass. "Everything looks in order to me," she said, her tone professional but pointed. "I'll get your apple juice," she told Jamal with a genuine smile. Catherine's lips thinned, but she moved on to the next row without further comment. As more passengers boarded, Jamal noticed a pattern. Catherine would warmly greet white passengers while barely acknowledging others. When Linda brought his apple juice, she placed it on his tray table with a kind wink that made him feel slightly better. "That's a very nice suit," she commented. "Are you traveling for business?" Before Jamal could answer, Reynolds interjected. Probably his first time on an airplane. Skyline must be giving away first-class tickets as some kind of diversity promotion. Linda's smile faltered, but she maintained her composure. "Sir, all our passengers deserve respect. I'm attending the Young Entrepreneurs Conference in New York." Jamal answered, keeping his voice steady despite the churning in his stomach. "I'm presenting my new app." Reynolds raised an eyebrow but said nothing more, turning his attention to his drink. As the final boarding announcements were made, Jamal felt increasingly isolated. He tried to focus on his presentation notes, but it was difficult to concentrate with the weight of disapproving glances and whispered comments around him. When the plane began taxiing, Jamal gazed out the window, watching Atlanta grow smaller beneath him. He thought of his father's words about working twice as hard for half the respect. Right now, he'd settle for just being treated like any other passenger. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Catherine began the in-flight service. She moved methodically through the cabin, attending to each passenger with practiced efficiency until she reached Jamal's row. "I believe this young man might be in the wrong seat," she said loudly to Reynolds, as if Jamal weren't present. "We've had issues with seat confusion before." Reynolds nodded knowingly. "I was thinking the same thing myself." Jamal's hands clenched in his lap. "My seat is 3A, he said clearly, as shown on my boarding pass twice. Catherine's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, sometimes these things happen. Computers make mistakes." Passengers around them had begun to stare and whisper. Jamal felt his throat tightening, but he remembered his father's advice. "Never let them see you sweat." "I assure you," he said with a calm he didn't feel, "I'm in the correct seat." Linda Chin passed by at that moment, pausing when she sensed the tension. "Is everything all right here?" "Just fine," Catherine replied quickly. "Just making sure everyone is where they belong." The emphasis on the last word wasn't lost on Jamal. The message was clear. According to Catherine, he didn't belong in first class. As the flight continued, the situation only worsened. Reynolds repeatedly pressed his call button for trivial requests, each time using it as an opportunity to make a comment about today's youth or changing demographics. Catherine's treatment became increasingly obvious. When serving drinks, she placed Jamal's on his tray without a napkin. When distributing hot towels, Sheep ran out just before reaching him. Small slice, but each one a paper cut to his dignity. The final straw came during meal service. As Catherine leaned over to place Reynolds' meal tray, she accidentally knocked over Jamal's drink, sending apple juice cascading onto his lap and expensive suit. "Oh my," she said without a hint of genuine concern. "Accidents happen." She offered a single cocktail napkin wholly inadequate for the spill before moving on to the next passenger. Jamal sat in stunned silence, juice soaking through his pants, the sticky liquid seeping into the fine fabric of his suit. In the bathroom, as he dabbed at the stain with damp paper towels, he finally allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. Silent tears slid down his cheeks as he struggled to clean the suit his father had specially made for him. When he returned to his seat, red-eyed but composed, he found Linda had replaced his juice and placed extra napkins on his tray. "I'm sorry about what happened," she whispered before continuing her duties. Jamal nodded gratefully, though the damage was already done both to his suit and his spirit. A business-class passenger who had come forward to use the bathroom caught his eye on her way back. She had witnessed the drink incident and gave Jamal a sympathetic look. Later, as Catherine was occupied in the galley, the woman, a Latina in her 40s with kind eyes, stopped by his seat. "Don't let them break you," she whispered discreetly, slipping him a business card before returning to her seat. Jamal glanced at the card. Angela Ramirez, civil rights attorney. As the flight continued, Catherine's comments became even more pointed. Passing by his seat, she remarked loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "That's quite a fancy suit for someone so young. I wonder how you could afford something like that." The implication was clear, and it cut deeper than all the previous flights combined. The Skyline Airlines flight from Atlanta to New York had reached cruising altitude, but for Jamal Washington, the journey had become increasingly turbulent. Trying to focus on his business presentation notes, he found it impossible to concentrate as Catherine Brady's hostility created an atmosphere of tension around him. "I think someone might be in the wrong seat," Catherine announced loudly as she passed through the first-class cabin for the third time, making eye contact with passengers while nodding toward Jamal. The not-so-subtle suggestion caused several passengers to stare openly at the young black boy in the expensive suit. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you feel like you didn't belong? Comment number 1, if you've experienced discrimination in public spaces, or number 2, if you've witnessed it happening to someone else. And if you believe children deserve respect regardless of their race, hit that like button right now. Benjamin Reynolds, the white-haired passenger beside Jamal, seemed to take personal offense at the boy's presence. He pressed his call button repeatedly, each time with increasingly trivial requests. My pillow isn't fluffed properly, he complained during Catherine's fourth visit to their row. Of course, Mr. Reynolds. We want our premium passengers to be comfortable, Catherine replied, emphasizing premium while glancing pointedly at Jamal. As she adjusted Reynolds' pillow, she leaned across Jamal without acknowledgement, her elbow dangerously close to his drink. The message was clear. He was invisible, unworthy of the basic courtesy extended to other passengers. The businesswoman across the aisle frowned at the interaction, but remained silent. Most passengers were either oblivious to what was happening or chose not to get involved. "Would you like more juice?" Catherine asked Reynolds with a warm smile. "Please," he replied. "And perhaps you could check this young man's ticket again. I'm concerned he might be confused about his seating assignment." Before Jamal could protest, Catherine turned to him with manufactured concern. "Yes, let me see your boarding pass one more time. We wouldn't want anyone sitting somewhere they shouldn't be." This marked the fourth time his ticket had been questioned. Jamal reached for his backpack, but as he did, Catherine turned abruptly with Reynolds' drink, accidentally spilling it across Jamal's lap and onto his meticulously tailored suit. "Oh!" she exclaimed with exaggerated surprise but no genuine remorse. "How clumsy of me." The cold liquid soaked through his pants, staining the expensive fabric. Several passengers gasped, but no one intervened. "These things happen," Catherine said dismissively, offering a single cocktail napkin for a spill that required far more. "Your fancy suit will need dry cleaning. I suppose such an expensive outfit for someone your age. I wonder where it came from." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Jamal felt his cheeks burn with humiliation as whispers circulated through the cabin. In the tiny airplane bathroom, Jamal fought back tears as he attempted to clean his father's gift. The suit represented so much his father's pride, his own aspirations, the standard of excellence his family had always upheld. Now it was stained with more than just apple juice. It was stained with the reminder that to some, his worth would always be questioned because of his skin color. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone finger hovering over his father's contact. Elijah Washington would board a flight to London soon. One call and his father would move mountains to address this injustice. But something held Jamal back, a determination to handle this situation himself, to prove he could navigate the world his father had prepared him for. Instead, he sent a simple text, landed safely. "All good. Love you, Dad." The lie felt bitter on his fingers, but he wasn't ready to disappoint his father or distract him from his important business dealings. When Jamal returned to his seat, red-eyed but composed, Linda Chen, the other flight attendant, discreetly placed a club soda and clean napkins on his tray table. "This might help with the stain," she whispered, her eyes communicating what she couldn't say aloud. She had witnessed everything but seemed trapped in the same system that was currently oppressing Jamal. From several rows back, Angela Ramirez watched the scene unfold. The civil rights attorney had been observing Catherine's behavior since boarding, her professional instincts triggered by the blatant discrimination. As the flight encountered mild turbulence, passengers were distracted by the captain's announcement. Angela seized the opportunity to approach Jamal's seat under the pretense of heading to the restroom. "Keep your head up," she murmured, slipping him her business card. "What she's doing is wrong. Document everything." Jamal nodded almost imperceptibly, tucking the card into his pocket as Angela continued toward the restroom. When Catherine returned to the cabin, her targeting of Jamal had only escalated. "That's quite a fancy suit for a child," she remarked loudly, hovering near his seat. "I can't imagine how someone your age could afford something so expensive." Unless she let the accusation hang unfinished, but its meaning was unmistakable to everyone with an earshot. Jamal's jaw tightened. With steady hands, he discreetly positioned his phone to record their interaction, remembering Angela's advice. "Is there something you'd like to ask me directly, Miss Brady?" He questioned, his voice clear and unwavering despite his inner turmoil. Catherine's eyes narrowed at his composed response. I'm simply curious about a child traveling alone in first class, wearing what appears to be a very expensive suit. It's unusual, wouldn't you agree? I'm attending the Young Innovators Conference in New York, Jamal replied evenly. My father believes in dressing appropriately for business occasions. Your father, Catherine repeated with skepticism. And what does he do? He's an entrepreneur. Jamal answered, simply knowing that revealing his father's actual position would either not be believed or would change Catherine's behavior for the wrong reasons. Do you think Jamal should have told Catherine who his father is? Would it have made a difference in how she treated him? Drop a comment with your thoughts. And if you're enjoying this story of resilience in the face of discrimination, make sure to hit subscribe for more powerful stories like this one. The interaction was interrupted by Benjamin Reynolds pressing his call button yet again. As Catherine turned away, Jamal caught Linda's eye. Her apologetic expression provided small comfort in a situation spiraling beyond his control. For the remainder of the flight, Catherine continued her campaign of microaggressions, serving Jamal, last forgetting his requests, and making subtle but cutting remarks about his presence in first class. Each slight was another blow to his dignity, but also further evidence of the discrimination he was experiencing. By the time the captain announced their descent into New York, Jamal's expensive suit was stained, his spirit was bruised, but his resolve had hardened into determination. Whatever happened next, he would not allow this experience to define him. Staring out the window as Manhattan's skyline came into view, Jamal Washington's mind drifted back to his earliest memories of his father's entrepreneurial journey. At just 5 years old, he had sat cross-legged on the worn carpet of their small apartment, watching Elijah Washington hunched over a second-hand laptop coding late into the night. Back then, Washington Enterprises wasn't a tech empire. It was just a dream powered by his father's relentless drive and brilliant mind. "Why do you work so hard?" Daddy young Jamal had asked one night, rubbing sleep from his eyes after finding his father still awake at 2:00 a.m. Elijah had scooped him up, pointing to the lines of code on the screen. "Because the world doesn't expect people who look like us to succeed. Son, every line of code I write is breaking down a wall someone built to keep us out." Those words had imprinted themselves on Jamal's heart, becoming the foundation for his own ambitions. He'd watched his father pitch to investors who barely masked their skepticism upon seeing a black man enter the room. He'd witnessed the patronizing tones, the backhanded compliments, the surprise when Elijah demonstrated his expertise. "They'll always make you prove yourself twice," Elijah had explained after one particularly difficult meeting. "But never let them see your frustration. Use your intelligence as your weapon and your dignity as your shield." Jamal's entrepreneurial spirit had sparked early. At 6, while other kids set up lemonade stands, he'd created a neighborhood delivery service, organizing his friends with bicycles to deliver groceries to elderly residents for a small fee. By 8, he was learning coding from his father. At 10, he developed his first simple app, a scheduling tool for his middle school's basketball team. Now at 12, he was en route to present his latest creation at the Young Innovators Conference, an app called Equal Space that helped minority-owned businesses connect with investors and resources. The idea had come to him after watching his father struggle to secure funding despite having a superior product. The turbulence in the cabin jolted Jamal back to his present reality. Catherine Brady was pointedly ignoring him during the pre-landing service while continuing to fawn over Benjamin Reynolds. The contrast in treatment was so stark that several passengers had begun to notice exchanging uncomfortable glances. Reaching into his backpack, Jamal pulled out his presentation notes, forcing himself to focus on tomorrow's conference rather than the humiliation he was currently enduring. The familiar technical terms and business concepts grounded him, reconnecting him to his purpose. His phone buzzed with a text from his father. "Just boarded my flight to London. Hope yours was smooth. Proud of you, son." Jamal hesitated, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Should he tell his father what was happening? Elijah Washington had the power to bring Skyline Airlines to its knees with a single phone call. But something inside Jamal resisted. This was his journey, his challenge to overcome. All good. excited about tomorrow's presentation. Safe travels, Dad. He typed back the half-truth sitting uncomfortably in his chest. As he returned his phone to airplane mode, Jamal noticed Angela Ramirez watching him from several rows back. The civil rights attorney gave him a subtle nod of encouragement, which bolstered his resolve. He wasn't alone in recognizing the injustice taking place. During a moment of turbulence when passengers were distracted by the captain's announcement, Angela made her way up the aisle under the pretense of using the restroom. Pausing briefly by Jamal's seat, she bent down as if retrieving something from the floor. "You're handling this with remarkable dignity," she whispered. "But what she's doing is illegal. Document everything. I've been recording some of it," Jamal admitted quietly. Angela nodded approvingly. "Smart boy. Here's my card. Call me if you need support." As she slipped him her business card, their exchange was interrupted by Catherine's sharp voice. "Excuse me, ma'am. Please return to your seat during turbulence." Angela straightened, meeting Catherine's gaze with professional coolness. Of course, just helping this young man with something he dropped. As Angela made her way back to her seat, Catherine's eyes narrowed suspiciously at Jamal, who tucked the business card into his pocket and returned to reviewing his presentation notes with fine absorption. The rest of the flight passed in a tense silence, with Jamal using his father's lessons as armor against Catherine's continued slights. Each dismissive glance and deliberate oversight was met with composed dignity, each microaggression cataloged in both his memory and his phone's recording app. When the captain announced their final descent into JFK International Airport, Jamal felt a complex mixture of relief and determination wash over him. The ordeal was nearly over, but its impact would linger. Rather than diminishing him, however, Catherine's actions had inadvertently strengthened his resolve to succeed, to create spaces where such discrimination couldn't thrive. As the plane touched down on New York soil, Jamal made a decision. The experience he just endured would not be wasted. Somehow, he would transform this painful episode into positive change, not just for himself, but for others who faced similar treatment without the resources or connections to fight back. The entrepreneurial spirit that had been nurtured by his father saw opportunity even in adversity. By the time the seatbelt sign dinged off, Jamal had already begun mentally modifying his app's design, expanding its scope to address discrimination in service industries. Each humiliation he'd suffered would fuel innovation. Each slight would inspire a new feature. Catherine's voice broke through his thoughts as she made the standard landing announcements, her eyes deliberately skipping over Jamal as she thanked passengers for choosing Skyline Airlines. The irony wasn't lost on him. There had been no choice in how he was treated, only the arbitrary judgment based on the color of his skin. Yet as passengers began to gather their belongings, Jamal felt a strange sense of gratitude toward Catherine Brady. Without intending to, she had given him something valuable. Firehand experience of the problem his technology could help solve, and an unshakable determination to ensure that no one else would have to endure what he had just experienced. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers throughout the cabin began gathering their belongings. Jamal Washington carefully tucked his presentation notes into his backpack, his movements measured and deliberate, despite the emotional turbulence he'd endured throughout the flight. Catherine Brady's voice came over the intercom, thanking first-class passengers for choosing Skyline Airlines and wishing them a pleasant stay in New York. Her gaze swept across the cabin, deliberately skipping over Jamal as she made eye contact with other passengers. As Jamal reached for his carry-on in the overhead compartment, Catherine approached her practiced smile firmly in place for the benefit of others. "That's quite an expensive piece of luggage for someone your age," she remarked loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "I hope it wasn't borrowed without permission." The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, but none intervened. Benjamin Reynolds smirked, nodding in agreement as he collected his own designer briefcase. Jamal's hands trembled slightly as he grasped the handle of his luggage, a graduation gift from his father, when he completed an advanced business course at a local college. Before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "I'll help you with that," Linda Chin said, stepping forward to assist Jamal. Her eyes met Catherine's briefly, a silent challenge in their depths. "This young gentleman has been nothing but polite during the entire flight, despite certain challenges." Catherine's smile tightened, but with other passengers watching, she merely turned away to assist an elderly couple several rows ahead. "Thank you," Jamal said quietly to Linda as they moved toward the exit. "I'm sorry I didn't do more sooner," Linda replied, her voice low. "What happened today wasn't right." As Jamal stepped off the plane, he maintained the dignified posture his father had taught him. Shoulders back, head high, eyes forward. But inside, he was crumbling. The accumulated weight of Catherine's targeted harassment had taken its toll, and it was all he could do to maintain his composure until he reached the terminal. Scanning the crowd at the arrival gate, he spotted his aunt, Vanessa Williams, waving enthusiastically. Tall and elegant in a tailored pantsuit, she pushed through the crowd to reach him, her smile fading as she took in his stained suit and attention in his young face. "Jamal, what happened to your suit?" she asked, embracing him tightly. "It's nothing, Aunt Vanessa," he replied automatically, the practiced response of someone accustomed to minimizing racial incidents to avoid worry. But Vanessa wasn't easily fooled. As they walked toward baggage claim, her trained eye honed by years as a corporate executive facing her own battles with discrimination, noted his rigid posture and the slight redness around his eyes. "Jamal Anthony Washington," she said firmly, guiding him to a quiet corner near a coffee shop. "Tell me what happened now." In the privacy of the secluded seating area, Jamal's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Words tumbled out in a rush. Catherine's suspicion, the repeated ticket checks, Reynolds' comments, the accidental spill, the humiliating suggestions about his suit and luggage. Vanessa's expression darkened with each detail, her jaw tightening in a way that reminded Jamal powerfully of his father. When he finished, she pulled him into another embrace. This one fierce and protective. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered against his hair. "You shouldn't have had to experience that." "Not ever, and certainly not alone." "Please don't tell Dad," Jamal pleaded, pulling back to look at her. "He's on his way to London for an important meeting. I don't want to distract him." Vanessa studied her nephew's face, recognizing the same determination she'd often seen in her brother's eyes. "Jamal, your father would want to know." After the conference, Jamal insisted, "Let me present my app first." "Please, Aunt Vanessa." She hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "After the conference, but we are absolutely telling him." As they collected Jamal's checked luggage and headed toward the taxi stand, Vanessa's phone rang. The caller ID showed Elijah Washington. "It's your father," she said, showing Jamal the screen. "He must have landed in London." Jamal took a deep breath, composing himself before nodding for her to answer. "Hey, Elijah." Vanessa greeted, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes, he's right here with me." The flight was on time. She listened for a moment. "He's fine, just a little tired from the trip." Jamal watched his aunt's internal struggle play across her face. Vanessa had never been good at hiding her emotions, especially from her brother. "Actually, Elijah," she said suddenly, her resolve visibly hardening, "there's something you should know." Before Jamal could protest, Vanessa was recounting the incident in precise, measured terms that grew increasingly clipped as Elijah's silence on the other end lengthened. Jamal could imagine his father's expression, the controlled calm that masked a building storm. When she finally handed the phone to Jamal, his father's voice was unnaturally steady. "Son, I need you to tell me exactly what happened, every detail." For the second time, Jamal recounted the humiliating experience this time, including details he'd spared his aunt. The whispers from other passengers, the way Catherine had looked through him, as if he were invisible. The feeling of being treated as less than human because of his skin color. The silence that followed was deafening. When Elijah finally spoke, his voice was glacial with controlled fury. "I'm coming back, Dad." "No," Jamal protested. "Your London meeting is not more important than this." Elijah cut him off. "I'll have Thomas handle London. I'm on the next flight home." But Dad Jamal, his father, interrupted his tone, softening slightly. "You've shown incredible strength today. I'm so proud of how you handled yourself, but you shouldn't have to fight these battles alone. Not yet." After ending the call with his father, Jamal's phone buzzed with an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered. "Jamal Washington, this is Angela Ramirez from the flight." "Yes, ma'am," he replied, moving slightly away from Vanessa to speak privately. "I witnessed what happened," Angela said, without preamble. "What that flight attendant did constitutes discrimination and harassment. I'd like to help if you're willing to pursue this." Jamal thought of his father's imminent return, the conference tomorrow, the app he'd worked so hard to develop. "I need to talk to my dad first," he said. "He's on his way back from London." "Elijah Washington is your father?" Angela asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Yes, ma'am." There was a moment of silence before Angela spoke again. "I understand now. Take the time you need with your family. But know that what happened today shouldn't go unchallenged. Not just for you, but for everyone who doesn't have a father like yours to fight for them." After hanging up, Jamal rejoined his aunt, who was securing a taxi. Despite the exhaustion and emotional toll of the day, his mind was already churning with determination. Tomorrow's conference suddenly held even greater importance. His app, originally designed to connect minority entrepreneurs with resources, now seemed like just the beginning of what needed to be done. "You okay, kiddo?" Vanessa asked, squeezing his shoulder as they slid into the taxi. Jamal nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I will be, and I think I know how to make something good come from today." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Jamal glanced back at the airport where thousands of travelers moved through the terminal, each with their own story. How many had experienced what he had today? How many had suffered in silence, without the resources or connections to fight back? Tomorrow, he would use his voice not just for himself, but for all of them. The Metropolitan Convention Center buzzed with activity as young innovators from across the country gathered for the prestigious Young Innovators Conference. Sleek displays showcased everything from environmental solutions to cutting-edge artificial intelligence, all created by entrepreneurs under 18. Jamal Washington stood before the mirror in the presenter's preparation room, adjusting his replacement suit, a near-identical one had somehow procured overnight. The stained original hung in the hotel closet, a tangible reminder of yesterday's humiliation. "You sure you're up for this?" Vanessa asked, concern etching her features. "No one would blame you if you wanted to skip it after what happened. Is there a time when you pushed through a difficult situation even when you could have walked away? Comment number 1 if you've ever turned adversity into motivation, or number 2 if you believe children should be shielded from discrimination rather than having to face it. And if you're inspired by Jamal's determination, make sure to hit that like button. I need to do this." Aunt Vanessa Jamal replied, his voice steady despite the lingering emotional exhaustion. Now more than ever, as he entered the main exhibition hall, Jamal immediately felt the familiar weight of scrutiny. The conference attendees, predominantly white and Asian teenagers from privileged backgrounds, eyed his professional attire with the same skepticism he'd encountered on the plane. A group of young entrepreneurs from an elite private school in Manhattan barely concealed their smirks as Jamal approached the registration desk. "Is he lost?" one boy whispered loudly to another. "The school tours are in the East Wing." Jamal pretended not to hear, collecting his presenter badge with the same dignified composure he'd maintained on the flight. Inside, however, determination burned even brighter. Their dismissal only fueled his resolve to make an impact. Setting up his display in the assigned booth, Jamal arranged his materials with methodical precision. His presentation materials had been updated overnight. The focus of his app suddenly shifted from its original concept. The first round of judging began at 10:00. Presentation after presentation showcased impressive innovations: a water filtration system developed by a 16-year-old from Seattle, a sustainable fashion line created by twin sisters from Chicago, a food waste reduction app designed by a team from Los Angeles. When Jamal's turn came, he approached the stage with steady steps, aware of the whispers that followed him. The judges, a venture capitalist, a tech industry leader, and an academic, watched with neutral expressions as he connected his laptop to the projector. "Good morning," Jamal began, his voice clear and confident. "My name is Jamal Washington, and I'm the creator of Equal Pace." He launched into his presentation, explaining how his app had originally been designed to connect minority-owned businesses with investors and resources. The technical specifications were impressive enough, the user interface intuitive, the algorithm sophisticated, the market research thorough. But halfway through his allotted time, Jamal deviated from his prepared remarks. "Yesterday, on my flight to New York," he said, his voice unwavering, "I experienced something that fundamentally changed how I view this project." The audience stilled as Jamal recounted his experience on Skyline Airlines. Not with self-pity or anger, but with analytical precision, identifying patterns of discriminatory behavior and systemic failures. "What I realized," he continued, "is that Equal Space needs to be more than a business resource. It needs to be a platform for accountability." With that, he unveiled the expanded vision for his app, a system that would allow users to document and report discrimination in real time, creating data patterns that could drive meaningful change in service industries. The technical framework was already in place. He had stayed up most of the night coding the additional features. Discrimination thrives in silence. Jamal concluded, his young voice carrying surprising authority. Equal Space will ensure that these experiences are documented, validated, and addressed, not just for those with connections or resources, but for everyone who faces unfair treatment based on who they are. As he finished, the convention hall remained silent for a long moment before erupting in applause. The judges leaned forward, suddenly engaged in a way they hadn't been for previous presentations. "Mr. Washington," the venture capitalist began, "this is remarkably sophisticated work for someone your age. How did you develop the pattern recognition algorithms?" For the next 15 minutes, Jamal fielded increasingly complex technical questions, demonstrating not just vision, but extraordinary technical expertise. By the time he returned to his booth, a crowd had gathered, interested investors and fellow young entrepreneurs eager to learn more. Among them was James Chen, a 17-year-old tech prodigy whose family owned a major software company. "That was impressive," James said, extending his hand. "Most people here are building toys. You're building something necessary." Throughout the afternoon, Jamal's booth became one of the most visited at the conference. The same peers who had dismissed him earlier now approached with respect, if not outright admiration. Several investors expressed interest in providing seed funding, impressed by both the concept and Jamal's obvious technical prowess. When the judges returned for the final evaluation, the tension in the exhibition hall was palpable. The announcements began with honorable mentions, followed by category winners for sustainability, healthcare innovation, and educational technology. And now announced Dr. Maya Patel, the academic judge, our overall winner, who will receive $50,000 in seed funding and mentorship from Innovate Capital. She paused, building anticipation, as she opened the envelope. The winner of this year's Young Innovators Conference is Jamal Washington for Equal Space. The applause was thunderous as Jamal made his way back to the stage, acceptance speech in hand. But before he could begin, his phone buzzed with a notification. Glancing down, he saw a news alert. Tech prodigy's discrimination claim goes viral. Respect Jamal trending nationwide. Confused, Jamal opened the link to find a social media explosion around his experience. Someone he suspected, Linda Chen, had shared his story online, including partial recordings from the flight. The Respect Jamal was trending, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination in the service industry. As he delivered his acceptance speech, Jamal was acutely aware that his audience had suddenly expanded far beyond the convention center. His words about accountability and documentation resonated not just with the conference attendees, but with countless others following the unfolding story online. Stepping off the stage, Jamal was immediately surrounded by journalists eager for interviews. Among them was a reporter from Tech Innovator magazine, whose questions went beyond the viral story to focus on the technical merits of his app. "Your pattern recognition algorithm is remarkably sophisticated," the journalist noted. "How did you develop it at such a young age?" "My father taught me coding when I was 8, Jamal explained. "I've been building on those skills ever since." "And your father is an entrepreneur," Jamal replied simply, maintaining his father's privacy. As the crowd of reporters grew, Vanessa stepped in, gently extracting her nephew. "That's enough questions for today. Jamal needs to rest." Back in their hotel suite, Jamal's phone continued to buzz with notifications. Among them was a message from Linda Chen. "I couldn't stay silent. What happened was wrong. I've provided a statement to the airline and on social media. I'm sorry if this complicates things for you, but it needed to be said." Another message came from Angela Ramirez. "You've started something important. When you're ready to discuss next steps, call me." Most surprising was an email from James Chen's father, Victor Chen, CEO of Chen Technologies. "Your innovation and courage are remarkable. Chen Technologies would be interested in discussing partnership opportunities for equal space. My son speaks very highly of you." As Jamal processed the day's unexpected developments, his hotel room door opened. Standing there, still in his travel clothes and clearly exhausted from a transatlantic flight, was Elijah Washington. "Dad!" Jamal exclaimed, rushing into his father's embrace. Elijah held his son tightly, his usual composed demeanor giving way to raw emotion. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there," he whispered. "It's okay, Dad," Jamal replied. I think what happened needed to happen." Elijah pulled back, studying his son's face with a mixture of concern and pride. "Vanessa told me, you won the conference and now you're trending online." Jamal nodded, explaining how his experience had transformed his app's purpose and sparked a larger conversation about discrimination. Elijah listened intently, his expression shifting from concern to thoughtful consideration. "So what do you want to do next?" he finally asked. "I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," Jamal replied without hesitation. "Not just on Skyline Airlines, but anywhere." A slow smile spread across Elijah's face, the same expression he wore when closing an important deal. "Then, let's make that happen." As father and son began strategizing, neither could have predicted how the next 24 hours would unfold, or how a single flight attendant's discriminatory actions would ultimately transform an entire industry. The morning after Jamal's conference triumph, the Washington Hotel suite transformed into an impromptu command center. Elijah Washington, still jet-lagged but laser-focused, worked 3 phones simultaneously while Vanessa managed the flood of media requests. Jamal sat cross-legged on the sofa monitoring social media, where the Nada Respect Jamal and Darbar Boycott Skyline continued to trend worldwide. Skyline Airlines has issued a statement, Vanessa announced, reading from her tablet. They say they're investigating the alleged incident and take all customer concerns seriously, then the usual boilerplate about diversity being a core value. Elijah's expression hardened. Alleged incident? He repeated the words sharp with contempt, as if there weren't recordings and multiple witnesses. The dismissive corporate response had come after Jamal's story exploded online overnight. Linda Chen's social media post, which included her own account of Catherine Brady's behavior and corroborated Jamal's experience, had gone viral, amplified by Angela Ramirez, who had shared a legal perspective on the discrimination witnessed. Elijah's phone rang again. Thomas Gregory, CEO of Skyline Airlines, attempting his third call of the morning. For the third time, Elijah declined it. "Shouldn't you talk to him?" Jamal asked, looking up from his laptop. "Not yet," Elijah replied, checking his watch. "The board meeting isn't for another hour. Let him sweat." What Skyline Airlines didn't know, what very few people knew, was that Washington Enterprises had been quietly acquiring shares in the airline over the past 6 months, preparing for a possible expansion into the travel technology sector. Elijah now held enough stock to command a seat at the emergency board meeting called to address the PR crisis. "Angela Ramirez is here," Vanessa announced, answering a knock at the door. The civil rights attorney entered professional in a charcoal suit, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mr. Washington," she greeted Elijah with a firm handshake before turning to Jamal with a warm smile. "And the man of the hour, congratulations on your conference win." "Thank you for everything you've done," Jamal replied, genuinely grateful for her support. "I've just come from a meeting with 3 other passengers from your flight who've agreed to provide statements," Angela reported, pulling documents from her portfolio. "And Linda Chen has officially filed an internal complaint about Catherine Brady's history of discriminatory behavior toward minority passengers." Elijah nodded approvingly. "This isn't just about what happened to Jamal. It's about a pattern of behavior Skyline has apparently been willing to ignore." "Exactly," Angela agreed. "And I found 5 similar complaints filed against Ms. Brady in the past year alone, all quietly resolved with vouchers and non-disclosure agreements." Vanessa, who had been scanning news reports, looked up sharply. "There's more. Benjamin Reynolds, the passenger who was encouraging Catherine, is the brother-in-law of Skyline board member Richard Anderson." The revelation added another dimension to the incident. Not only had Jamal faced discrimination from a flight attendant with a history of similar behavior, but he'd been targeted with the implicit support of someone connected to Skyline's leadership. Elijah checked his watch again. "It's time. Jamal, are you sure you want to come? No one would think less of you if you sat this out." Jamal straightened his tie. Another perfectly tailored suit. This one a deep charcoal gray. "I need to be there, Dad. This is my fight, too." The Skyline Airlines headquarters occupied the top floors of a gleaming midtown skyscraper. The security guards, clearly briefed about their arrival, escorted them directly to the executive floor, where a palpable tension permeated the air. Thomas Gregory, Skyline CEO, a silver-haired man with the weathered tan of someone who spent more time on golf courses than in boardrooms, greeted them with forced cordiality. "Elijah, I can't tell you how deeply concerned we are about this unfortunate misunderstanding." He began extending his hand. Elijah regarded the offered hand with cool assessment before eventually shaking it. "Let's be clear, Thomas. What happened to my son wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination witnessed and documented by multiple passengers." Gregory's smile faltered. "Of course we take these allegations very seriously. They're not allegations," Jamal interrupted, his young voice steady. "They happened. I have recordings." Gregory looked taken back, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged by a 12-year-old. "Well, I'm sure once we've completed our internal review, I believe that review might need to happen more publicly than you'd prefer," Angela interjected smoothly. Given the pattern of similar incidents that have been systematically buried, the CEO's composure slipped further. "I'm not sure who you are, Ms. Ramirez, civil rights attorney. I was on the flight with Jamal." Before Gregory could respond, his assistant appeared at his elbow, whispering urgently. His face palled as he listened. "Skyline stock has dropped 15% since market opening," Elijah observed, casually checking his phone. "That's what happens when our boycott Skyline trends worldwide and celebrities start canceling their corporate accounts." Gregory's jaw tightened. "The board is waiting. Shall we?" The boardroom fell silent as they entered. 12 board members sat around a massive table, their expressions ranging from concern to outright hostility. Richard Anderson, Benjamin Reynolds' brother-in-law, glared openly at Jamal. At the far end of the table, looking distinctly uncomfortable, sat Catherine Brady. She froze when she spotted Jamal, the color draining from her face, as she realized who he was and, more importantly, who his father was. Mrs. Brady, I believe you've already met my son on yesterday's flight. Elijah stated, his voice cutting through the tension like ice. Let's discuss how you treated him, shall we? For the next hour, the boardroom became a courtroom of sorts. Angela presented the documented pattern of discrimination, including statements from other passengers and previous complaints against Catherine. Jamal played selected recordings from the flight, his young voice steady as he narrated the context for each clip. Catherine's defense crumbled as the evidence mounted. Her claims of a misunderstanding rang hollow against the recorded evidence of her asking to verify Jamal's ticket 4 separate times. Her comments about his fancy suit and the accidental drink spill, followed by inadequate assistance. Ms. Brady has been with Skyline for 15 years. Gregory attempted desperation creeping into his voice. Her record has been exemplary. Except for the 6 formal complaints of discriminatory behavior, all settled quietly, Angela countered, sliding copies of the documentation across the table. And Ms. Chen's testimony about being instructed to ignore similar incidents in the past. At that moment, the boardroom door opened and Linda Chen entered, escorted by Vanessa. Her presence clearly surprised the Skyline executives. Ms. Chen is still employed by Skyline, despite attempts to silence her, Vanessa explained, taking a seat beside Jamal. She's here voluntarily to provide additional context. Linda's testimony proved devastating. In a clear, professional voice, she detailed not just Catherine's treatment of Jamal, but a pattern of similar behavior toward minority passengers that had been repeatedly reported and systematically ignored by management. We were told that keeping our premium customers comfortable was the priority, Linda explained, and it was implied that this meant catering to the preferences of older white passengers even when those preferences were discriminatory. As the evidence mounted, the board members' expressions shifted from defensive to concerned. The potential legal and public relations implications were becoming impossible to ignore. Richard Anderson, however, remained defiant. This is clearly an orchestrated attack, he declared. Washington, you've been buying Skyline stock for months. This is about corporate takeover, not some perceived slight to your son. Elijah's expression remained impassive. My interest in Skyline began as a business opportunity. That's true, but this incident has revealed something far more concerning than your balance sheet. It's exposed a culture that tolerates discrimination at every level, from flight attendants to board members whose relatives feel comfortable making racist comments to children. Anderson flushed crimson. My brother-in-law would never. I have the recordings, Mr. Anderson, Jamal interrupted quietly. Every comment Mr. Reynolds made about standard slipping and questioning my right to be in first class is documented. The boardroom fell silent as the full implications sank in. Skyline wasn't facing just one incident, but evidence of systemic discrimination that could potentially violate federal laws. Thomas Gregory, sensing the shifting tide, attempted damage control. Clearly, mistakes were made. We're prepared to offer compensation and a formal apology. This isn't about compensation, Elijah cut in. It's about transformation. Skyline has a choice to make. Address the root causes of these incidents or face legal and financial consequences that will make today's stock drop look like a minor correction. He laid out his terms. Comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all staff and independent review of past complaints, a diverse oversight committee with actual authority and immediate implementation of new reporting systems, ironically similar to what Jamal's app was designed to provide. As the board members huddled in hasty discussion, Catherine Brady finally spoke, her voice thick with tears. I want to apologize to Jamal. I never meant to stop, Jamal said, meeting her gaze directly. You meant every word, every action. You judged me the moment you saw me. You decided I didn't belong in first class because of how I look. That wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Catherine fell silent, unable to maintain eye contact with the 12-year-old whose dignity now stood in stark contrast to her own crumbling composure. Thomas Gregory cleared his throat. "We'll need time to consider these proposals." "You have 24 hours," Elijah replied, rising to his feet. "After that, Ms. Ramirez files her class action lawsuit, and I call for a shareholder vote to replace the board." As they exited the boardroom, leaving behind a panel of stunned executives, Jamal felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a profound sense of responsibility. What had begun as a personal humiliation was evolving into something much larger, with potential implications for countless others who faced similar discrimination without the resources or connections to fight back. "Did we just threaten to take over an airline?" he asked his father as they entered the elevator. Elijah's serious expression gave way to a rare smile. "Sometimes, son, the most effective way to change a system is from within." The elevator doors closed on the Skyline boardroom, where the future of an airline and perhaps an industry hung in the balance. 1 week after the boardroom showdown, Jamal Washington found himself once again in Skyline Airlines headquarters. The tension in the executive conference room was palpable as Thomas Gregory shuffled papers, nervously avoiding eye contact with the assembled group. To Jamal's left sat his father, Elijah Washington, poised and commanding in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. To his right, Angela Ramirez reviewed legal documents with practiced efficiency. Linda Chen sat nearby, her normally warm expression replaced by professional determination. The Washington family's team was completed by Aunt Vanessa, who had taken a week's leave from her own executive position to support her nephew through this process. Across the table, Skyline's contingent presented a stark contrast in their unified discomfort. Thomas Gregory occupied the center position, flanked by the airline's legal counsel and HR director. Richard Anderson, Benjamin Reynolds' brother-in-law, had been conspicuously excluded from this meeting. A small victory Jamal had quietly celebrated. At the far end of the table, separated slightly from her colleagues, Catherine Brady sat with her hands clasped tightly before her. Her usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back severely, complexion palette under harsh fluorescent lighting. "Thank you all for coming." Gregory began his practiced corporate voice, betraying a slight tremor. "We've reviewed the situation thoroughly and believe there's been a misunderstanding that we're eager to resolve amicably." Elijah raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, allowing the CEO to continue digging his own grave. "Ms. Brady has been with Skyline for 15 years with an exemplary service record," Gregory continued. "While there may have been a lapse in judgment during this particular interaction, we believe—" "Excuse me," Jamal interrupted, his young voice steady. But there was no misunderstanding. All eyes turned to the 12-year-old's surprise evident on the Skyline executives' faces. They clearly hadn't expected him to speak. "With all due respect," Mr. Gregory Jamal continued, "what happened on that flight wasn't a misunderstanding or a lapse in judgment. It was discrimination, plain and simple." Gregory's smile tightened. "Young man, in the adult business world, I believe my son has earned the right to speak," Elijah interjected smoothly, "particularly since he's the one who experienced Ms. Brady's behavior firsthand." Jamal nodded gratefully to his father before continuing. "I'd like to present my evidence systematically, if that's acceptable." Without waiting for permission, Jamal opened his laptop and connected it to the conference room's display system. With methodical precision that belied his age, he began presenting a timeline of the flight supported by recordings, photographs, and contemporaneous notes. "At 1:42 p.m., Ms. Brady checked my boarding pass for the first time," he narrated, displaying the time-stamped evidence. "At 1:55 p.m., she checked it again. At 2:10 p.m. for a third time, and at 2:47 p.m. for a fourth time. No other passenger had their ticket verified more than once. He continued through each interaction methodically, the accidental drink spill, the comments about his fancy suit, the suggestions about his luggage being borrowed, and the consistent pattern of service discrepancies between his treatment and that of white passengers. Catherine shifted uncomfortably as her actions were laid bare, stripped of plausible deniability by Jamal's meticulous documentation. This behavior didn't occur in isolation, Angela Ramirez added, taking over smoothly. Our investigation has uncovered 17 similar complaints against Ms. Brady over the past 3 years, all involving passengers of color, all resolved quietly with vouchers and confidentiality agreements. Thomas Gregory's face paled. Those complaints were handled according to company policy. A policy designed to bury systemic discrimination rather than address it, Angela countered, sliding a thick folder across the table. This constitutes a pattern of negligence that could potentially violate federal anti-discrimination laws. The Skyline legal counsel whispered urgently to Gregory, whose expression grew increasingly grim. Linda Chin cleared her throat. "If I may add to this evidence," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Ms. Brady's behavior toward minority passengers has been an open secret among the flight crew for years. Multiple flight attendants have reported concerns to management, myself included. She produced her own documentation, copies of emails, dates of verbal reports, and names of supervisors who had dismissed these concerns. 3 months ago, I formally reported an incident where Miss Brady made derogatory comments about a Middle Eastern family and provided substandard service, Linda continued. I was told by my supervisor that some passengers prefer traditional American service and that I should focus on maintaining harmony in the cabin. Catherine Brady, who had remained silent throughout these presentations, finally spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I never intended to discriminate against anyone. I was simply maintaining the standards our premium passengers expect. And what standards are those? Ms. Brady, Jamal asked, his voice calm but pointed. Because from where I sat, those standards seemed to include automatically suspecting black passengers of being in the wrong seat regardless of their ticket. Catherine flushed. That's not fair. You were very young to be traveling alone in first class. It was unusual. Yet the white teenager in 5C wasn't questioned once Jamal noted displaying a photograph. He was also traveling alone, also a minor. The difference was his skin color. Catherine fell silent, unable to counter this point. Thomas Gregory attempted to regain control of the meeting. While we take these concerns seriously, this appears to be one employee's actions rather than a systemic issue. 23 complaints across 16 different Skyline routes, all following the same pattern. Angela interrupted, producing another document. All handled with the same confidentiality agreements, all buried rather than addressed. She laid out additional evidence, internal emails showing Skyline managers discussing how to quietly resolve discrimination complaints without unnecessary escalation, training materials that emphasized catering to the comfort level of our premium demographic, and performance metrics that rewarded flight attendants for maintaining traditional service standards. As the evidence mounted, the Skyline executives' defenses crumbled visibly. What they had hoped to frame as an isolated incident had been revealed as part of a broader pattern that extended beyond Catherine Brady to the corporate culture itself. Unexpectedly, the conference room door opened, and 3 more former Skyline passengers entered. An older black businessman, a young Hispanic woman, and a Middle Eastern man in his 30s. These individuals experienced similar treatment on Skyline flights, Vanessa explained. They've agreed to join Ms. Ramirez's class action if necessary. Thomas Gregory's composure finally broke. What exactly do you want from us? He demanded, desperation evident in his voice. Financial compensation, public apology, transformation. Elijah replied simply. Skyline has a cancer in its corporate culture. Removing Ms. Brady would be like treating a symptom while ignoring the disease. He laid out their demands. A comprehensive overhaul of Skyline's training, reporting, and accountability systems. An independent diversity committee with actual authority, transparent handling of all discrimination complaints, and implementation of technology to identify and address patterns of discriminatory behavior. Catherine Brady, watching her career implode in real time, made one last attempt at damage control. "I want to apologize to Jamal," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. I was just doing my job the way I was trained to do it." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Jamal. The 12-year-old regarded Catherine thoughtfully, wisdom beyond his years evident in his measured response. "Ms. Brady, I appreciate that you believe that, but your apology doesn't change what happened not just to me, but to countless others who didn't have the resources to fight back. What matters now isn't your words, but your actions, and Skyline's commitment to ensure this never happens again." Catherine nodded, unable to meet his gaze. Thomas Gregory, recognizing the inevitable, cleared his throat. "We'll need time to consider these proposals. You've had a week," Elijah countered. "Your stock has dropped 23%. 3 major corporate accounts have suspended their contracts pending resolution. The court of public opinion has already rendered its verdict. The only question is whether Skyline will be part of the solution or continue to be the problem." As the meeting concluded, Jamal gathered his materials with the same methodical precision he'd shown throughout the presentation. He felt no triumph, no vindication, only a sobering awareness of how much work remained to be done. Outside the conference room, Linda Chin approached him. "You handled that with remarkable maturity," she said. "Most adults wouldn't have shown such composure." Jamal smiled slightly. "My dad always says dignity is the most powerful response to discrimination." Linda nodded. "I've submitted my resignation from Skyline effective immediately. I can't be part of a system that enables this behavior." "What will you do now?" Jamal asked. "I've received several offers." "Actually," Linda replied, "including one from your father, to help develop training programs for service industry professionals. But I wanted to ask your opinion before accepting." Jamal's eyes widened in surprise. "My opinion, you've earned that right," Linda said simply. "Your experience is driving this change. Your voice should be part of shaping what comes next." As they walked toward the elevator, Jamal considered how much had changed in just over a week. What had begun as a humiliating personal experience had catalyzed a movement that could potentially transform not just one airline, but an entire industry's approach to discrimination. The real work, he realized, was just beginning. 6 months later, Jamal Washington stepped through the sliding glass doors of Skyline Airlines headquarters, no longer as an accuser, but as a consultant. At 13, having celebrated his birthday the previous month, he carried himself with the confidence of someone much older, dressed in a tailored navy suit that mirrored his father's executive attire. The lobby had transformed since his last visit. Where corporate sterility had once dominated, vibrant artwork from diverse artists now adorned the walls. The security guard, a middle-aged black woman with a warm smile, greeted him by name. "Good morning, Mr. Washington. The board is expecting you on the 12th floor." As Jamal rode the elevator upward, he reflected on the whirlwind 6 months that had followed the confrontation with Skyline's leadership. The airline had ultimately accepted all of the Washington's demands, recognizing that the alternative, a class action lawsuit and continued public relations nightmare, would be far more costly. Catherine Brady was no longer employed by Skyline or any other airline. Rather than being simply terminated, she had been required to complete extensive sensitivity training and community service with organizations serving minority communities. Last, Jamal had heard she was working with a non-profit focused on educational equity, a fitting redirection of her career. The elevator doors opened to reveal a transformed executive floor. Framed photographs showcasing Skyline's diverse workforce had replaced the sterile corporate art. A large mission statement dominated the reception area, prominently featuring the words "Digne Respect and Inclusion." Thomas Gregory, still Skyline's CEO though, now flanked by a more diverse executive team, rose to greet Jamal. The past months had aged him, visibly stress-etching new lines around his eyes, but his handshake was firm and his smile genuine. "Jamal, thank you for coming. The team is eager to hear your assessment of our progress." The boardroom where the confrontation had occurred 6 months earlier was now filled with new faces. Richard Anderson was conspicuously absent, having resigned to pursue other opportunities shortly after the scandal broke. Benjamin Reynolds, his brother-in-law, who had encouraged Catherine's discrimination, had been banned from Skyline flights permanently. Linda Chen, now Skyline's Director of Inclusive Service Training, greeted Jamal with a warm embrace. Her promotion had been part of the company's overhaul, a recognition of her courage in speaking out and her expertise in customer service. "Your father sent his regrets," Linda told him. "The London meeting couldn't be rescheduled." Jamal nodded, secretly pleased. While Elijah had been instrumental in forcing Skyline's transformation, today's presentation was Jamal's alone, a testament to his father's confidence in him. Before we begin, Thomas Gregory announced, "I want to acknowledge how far we've come since Jamal first brought these issues to our attention. What began as a painful incident has transformed Skyline in ways we couldn't have imagined." The statistical evidence supported this claim. Discrimination complaints had decreased by 78%. Employee satisfaction scores among minority staff had increased dramatically. Most tellingly, Skyline's customer satisfaction ratings had improved across all demographics. Now, Gregory continued, "I'd like Jamal to share his assessment of our diversity and inclusion implementation." At 13, Jamal Washington was possibly the youngest consultant ever to address a major airlines board. Yet as he connected his laptop to the display system and launched his presentation, his youth seemed irrelevant. The data he had compiled, the analysis he had conducted, and the recommendations he presented reflected a sophistication that commanded respect regardless of age. "Skyline has made significant progress," Jamal began. "But sustainable transformation requires ongoing commitment. Today, I want to discuss 3 areas where improvement is still needed." For the next 45 minutes, he detailed his findings, areas where implementation was lagging departments, where resistance to change remained, and opportunities for deeper integration of inclusive practices. His presentation was neither accusatory nor congratulatory, but analytical and solution-focused. When he finished, the board members didn't patronize him with simplified questions or condescending praise. Instead, they engaged with his analysis, directly debating implementation strategies and resource allocation with the seriousness his work deserved. "We've also rolled out your Equal Space app across our customer service platforms," Gregory noted. "The ability for passengers to report and rate their experiences in real time has been revolutionary." Jamal nodded. What had begun as his conference project had evolved into a powerful tool for accountability, now being adopted by service industries beyond aviation. The app's success had attracted significant investment, with proceeds establishing a foundation to support minority youth interested in technology and aviation. After the board meeting, Jamal was escorted to a training session for new flight attendants. As he entered the training room, 30 faces turned toward him with expressions of recognition. His story had become part of Skyline's onboarding process, not as a cautionary tale, but as a foundational case study in the importance of equitable service. "Mr. Washington will be observing today's session," Linda announced to the trainees. As many of you know, his experience helped Skyline recognize and address systemic issues in our service model. From the back of the room, Jamal watched as Linda led the trainees through scenarios designed to identify and counter unconscious bias. The exercises were sophisticated, the discussions nuanced, and the commitment evident. During a break, a young black woman approached him. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said quietly. "I've worked in customer service for years, always feeling like I had to accept certain realities. What you did changed things for all of us." Later that afternoon, as Jamal prepared to depart, Thomas Gregory walked him to the elevator. "Your father mentioned you'll be flying Skyline to Chicago next week for the Youth Innovation Summit." Jamal nodded. "First solo flight since." "Well, you know." Gregory's expression turned serious. "I want to personally assure you that the experience will be nothing like last time." "I know," Jamal replied simply. The following week, as Jamal boarded his Skyline flight to Chicago, he was greeted with genuine respect by the entire crew. The flight attendant who helped him with his carry-on was professional and courteous, treating him with the same dignity afforded to every first-class passenger. As the plane took off, Jamal gazed out the window, reflecting on how a single discriminatory incident had sparked a transformation that extended far beyond one airline. His Equal Space app was now being implemented across multiple service industries, creating accountability and driving systemic change. The Washington Foundation had established scholarships for minority youth interested in aviation and technology, ensuring the next generation would find more open doors than closed ones. Most importantly, Jamal himself had grown from the experience. The 12-year-old who had been humiliated for wearing a suit that was too fancy had emerged stronger, more determined, and even more committed to creating a world where people were judged by their character rather than their color. As the flight attendant offered him apple juice, served with a napkin and a genuine smile, Jamal accepted with quiet confidence. Sometimes, he reflected, transformation begins with a single moment of injustice, challenged by those brave enough to stand up and say this is wrong and it needs to change. Jamal's story teaches us that confronting discrimination requires both courage and strategy. When faced with injustice, documenting the evidence, building alliances with witnesses, and approaching the problem systematically can transform personal pain into powerful change. The most effective response to discrimination isn't just righteous anger, though that has its place, but thoughtful action that exposes patterns and demands accountability. True transformation happens when we move beyond individual incidents to address the systems that enable them. Catherine Brady wasn't just one prejudiced flight attendant. She was a symptom of a corporate culture that tacitly permitted discrimination. By targeting the root causes rather than just the symptoms, Jamal and his father created lasting change that benefited countless others. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that dignity is the most powerful response to discrimination. Throughout his ordeal, Jamal maintained his composure and self-respect, refusing to let others' prejudice define his worth. His greatest victory wasn't in punishing those who wronged him, but in creating systems that prevented others from experiencing the same injustice. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in a public place? How did you respond? Share your story in the comments below. If you believe that standing up against racism requires both courage and strategy, hit that like button to show your support. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about overcoming discrimination and creating positive change. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them today. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most powerful force for change is a single voice brave enough to speak truth to power.